Episode 99. Really excited to have Annelies Husmann here, who runs enterprise sales for growth at Gong. Annelies, how you doing?
Good morning, Randy. I'm doing fantastic.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining us. You're in, I think, Incline Village, Nevada, and I'm in New York City. So, two probably very different places. I think I'd much rather be there with you. And my Wi-Fi was bad in my room, so I'm literally in a corner of a restaurant that has much better Wi-Fi. So it's worked so far. So hopefully we'll continue. So we're also sponsored today by Alexander Group, who I know Annelies has had some experience with. We can talk about that later. But they're a sponsor of the sales community, and for I'd say a bunch of my hardcore CRO friends who are really hard to please. Alexander Group does a lot of great help around go-to-market, a whole bunch of different kind of go-to-market areas around compensation, around channel. And I kind of consider them, if it's okay to say, a kind of blue-collar or scrappy version of McKinsey or Bain. So I say that in a very kind, loving, and respectful way. Hopefully that goes across okay. And also, as always, brought to you by Sales Community. For those that are members, thanks. Anybody that wants a membership, you can actually go to the site, salescommunity.com, and you'll see in the upper left-hand corner link that says Fall Free. So you can hit that. You can get a free year membership. If you hit the other one, you can pay. So your choice what you want to do. So by way of background, Annelies and I really only met each other this year, so I don't have any good war stories, but as I continue to do more to help Gong sell more, definitely look forward to creating some good stories, if that's okay to say. And as I said, recently moved from San Francisco to Incline Village, Nevada. Went to UT. So how do you do the horn thing?
Hook 'em horns.
There you go. Hook 'em horns. Okay, it's two fingers. Okay, there you go. That's right.
Yes.
Sorry. And interestingly enough, during 2019-20, you spent 11 months with your husband driving to national parks, and then you explored 14 countries in Europe and Asia. That must have been a blast.
It was a time in my life.
Really cool. And obviously enjoying the mountain lifestyle, and really enjoyed catching up about your 14-month-old who is amazing, all the great activities and everything that's going on.
He's a wild man, so it's a good thing we're raising him up here in the mountains.
There you go. Perfect. All right. So let's jump right into it. Maybe tell us a little bit about what your first job was, and then briefly about your career.
Absolutely. My first real tech job was a company called O-Power. If people remember those, it was an energy efficiency company based out of Washington, D.C., which is when I lived on the East Coast as well. I started at employee 17, where we were all, working 60 hours a week, like really bootstrapping this organization. And, I got to see the first ride of small company that eventually IPO'd. And of course, in my mind, I thought, oh, great, all tech companies are going to
happens all the time. Oh, yeah.
It'll be this easy. But needless to say, that gave me the bug, and why I've stayed in tech ever since.
Awesome. And then what out from there?
From there, I moved out west to San Francisco. I spent the last 10 years in the Bay, and have always stayed in B2B SaaS companies during that fast growth stage. So spent some time at Yammer prior to the Microsoft acquisition. Spent time at AdRoll when we were going from 100 employees to, a global footprint. But really small after that to a company called Mode Analytics, and helped build them from the ground up. And then that led me into my year-long sabbatical.
There you go. Awesome. And it's been a great ride with Gong so far, right?
Couldn't have picked a better place to return back to.
Awesome. So maybe tell us a little bit more about Gong.
You bet. So from the beginning, I think we were talking about this a little bit earlier, Randy. Just kind of my phrase of Gong and how I see it today in my day-to-day life as a go-to-market leader, which is I literally will never go to market without it again. And I know I drank the champagne. I'm a sales leader there. But what we do is we provide reality into your business so you can make better decisions. So do you want to actually walk people through Gong a little bit, or should we assume everyone knows high level?
Yeah, no, I don't think that. I mean, one thing I found really fascinating was when you're doing your reviews with your sales team. The old days you'd have to ask them all the detailed questions, but because they're using Gong, you're coming to the meeting knowing who the decision maker is, who they met with, where they're at, what's the value prop, what's the timing on the
Mhm.
order, kind of all that. So then it's really able to bring the discussion and have you add a lot more value kind of going forward, versus kind of looking in
Exactly.
the mirror.
Exactly. I mean, no sales leader wants to go into a one-on-one and play 20 questions
Yeah.
and ask all of those mundane questions. And no rep wants to be asking those questions either. And so what Gong will do is we'll aggregate all that information in one spot. So me as a sales leader, I can come prepared to my one-on-ones and my deal reviews and spend that hour I have with my manager or rep really thinking strategically, moving the deal forward, talking about how we're going to win more business, not playing 20 questions around who is the decision maker, are you actually at power, are you multi-threaded, etc. And so I think that's just the power of Gong is being able to bring all of that reality into one platform.
Yeah, that's great. And then maybe talk a little bit around the kind of, it's not just manually having to go listen, but there's also some kind of AI that comes involved in terms of coaching and recap and highlights and things like that too, right?
100%. So the first important piece though is we are aggregating all those data streams, whether it's email, video, conference calls, soon to be through our Gong collective, things like DocuSign information, the full picture of the reality. And then where I think what really sets Gong apart is our AI goes on top of it and will start providing you with actionable insights to be running your business better and making better decisions.
That's great. Any, is there a favorite customer story? I know there's lots of great customer stories, but any one in particular?
I think that what the ones that always really resonate with me is when you're talking to another sales leader who will tell you, Annalise, this has legitimately made my life better. Like I can now, I have a command over my business I never had before. I'm making more money. And it's all those like really small personal levers of how Gong is just changing their day-to-day operations. And those are the best customer stories because it's not about some big splashy win or, us all going to President's Club because of a deal we closed, but it's how we're helping our customers in their daily lives.
That's great. And then if you were talking to a recruit, what would you say in terms of why Gong, why the culture is special?
Sure. The culture is really special, and I know that sounds so silly to say, but I think it's everyone here just really loves, first and foremost, the platform we're selling. And when you really believe in the platform and when you really believe in what we're going to market with, that comes through in your day to day. And so I think that is like the basis of like what a great culture can be is we all love to be here. We love to sell this platform. And that's invaluable because I think we've all probably in our previous lives, Randy, have sold something we didn't quite believe in or quite get behind.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'm the only one. I
Or
don't
it
know.
didn't work, maybe.
Or it didn't work. Or you're worried about like how long is it going to show time to value or is it going to get set up properly?
Yeah. Time to
Um,
fail.
time to fail. There you go. And so I think that's just like a great part of the culture. And then I can go deeper into the other things that make Gong special, but it's just a really incredible group of people who are living our operating principles day in and day out.
That's great. And they're called Gong Stirs, right?
Correct. We're Gongsters.
There you go. Awesome. Love it. Love it. I got to spend some time a couple weeks ago during Dreamforce with Meet, who's definitely an impressive CEO, very authentic. And I was actually, we're doing a call with, I'm trying to remember who it was, but there's an it was a exec at a very large tech company that I know. And I was just happened to be saying, I just went with the Meet, very impressive. And he literally was walking by and I'm like, hey, Meet, come here. I'm going to introduce you to blah, blah, blah. And so it was like, it worked out so well. But anyway, so then moving off of Gong. So we've got kind of two title topics. One is diversity best practices, and the other one is women in sales. So certainly both very, very hot topics these days. So when you think about diversity best practices, obviously there's a lot, but kind of what comes to mind for you? And actually, before you go, sorry. So I always forget to say, so anybody that is listening or watching, you can see us, you can hear us, we can't see you, but feel free to post any comments or any questions at all. And Tucker behind the scenes, as always, will do a great job of pulling those up. So anyway, so Annalise, back to you. So thinking about diversity best practices.
Absolutely. I think that first and foremost, you have to have a strategy and you have to be thoughtful about what you're trying to solve for. I mean, coming up in the tech world as a woman in sales, like especially my first job in energy efficiency, there weren't very many other women in that field. And so I think from like an early age, this has been something that's been really important to me to make sure that I can have an impact on. And so when you're thinking about diversity and what are the best practices, again, it's have a strategy, be thoughtful about it, and understand it's going to be really hard to execute on it. Building a diverse team, building a team with underrepresented groups through and through, it's not an easy thing to do. And so I think you also need to make sure that you're dedicated to it as well.
So if you think about kind of the strategy for it, what are some kind of pieces that come into mind there?
Yeah, I think as a sales leader, you really need to be focused on selling throughout the entire process. And I need to be going outbound, right? Making sure that I'm out there recruiting top talent and making sure that most of this top talent, especially from URGs, they're going to be passive. And so you need to understand that they're not going to each be raising their hand a million times over, but you have to go out there and say, hey, I'm going to sell you as much as it is an interview process as well. And I think as leaders, we just have to roll up our sleeves and go do it.
Yeah. And then shameless plug for my book, your go-to sales advisor. But Paolo Doble, who's on our advisory board, who's a sales leader in Sono, has a great section on diversity best practices. But one in particular, which I think is really good, is having some minimum requirement where if it's an opening, there should be some number that you have as 5 that you interview or 3 that you interview, and you've got 1 or 2 that are finalists, just to kind of help force feed it, for lack of better words, kind of into the culture and the mindset and the best practices. What do you think about that?
Right. It sounds kind of like similar to the Rooney Rule, where you have to have 1 or 2 people come through the process to that. And I think you do have to, because especially if you're at a fast growth startup or any company that's moving fast, it could be really easy to say, "Ooh, but this is a great candidate. Let's just move forward." And if you haven't created those guardrails, so to speak, or reminders for yourself, you can very easily move away from it. So I agree with that 100%.
Yeah. And then how do you figure out, so you said like kind of from a thoughtfulness perspective, but how do you kind of train or ingrain that, thoughtfulness that obviously you have, kind of how do you get that in the behaviors of others?
That's a great question. I mean, I think at Gong, I'm really lucky. This is something that's important all the way up to Amit's level, the executive leadership team. And I also have incredible recruiting partners that have helped build these strategies with us. And not just that, but take it through to make sure we're meeting those numbers we committed to, and also training folks who might be new to the interview process or to the hiring and recruiting process. So it's not just something you can do in a silo on your own, but especially for me, it's wonderful to have support from ELT and from the entire TA team as well.
Yeah, that's great. And then, do you look at your team to then, not to put you on the spot, but teams that you've seen before to say, okay, kind of how do you improve there's the diversity, I guess the kind of URG, as you said, aspects, but then there's also just other cultural and just background differences as well, which then plays into diversity as well, right?
Absolutely. And so I would say we have a good mix. Is there always room for improvement? Of course. Yeah. Yes. And then that's where you go back to that idea, Randy, of let's go out there and do this on our own too. When I start sending out notes to people personally through LinkedIn and email, I get great responses. And so it's, if I'm a leader saying this is something that's important to me, I'm also going to put my time where my mouth is and go out and start recruiting and selling people as well. And that's something that's flowed through all the other leaders on my team, that when we were in a hyper growth stage, we all carved out an hour every week to do our own prospecting and to send out our own notes, because it was important to all of us to keep pushing that line of what good looks like.
Yeah, that's great. So before we move on, any other closing thoughts on diversity best practices?
No, just remember that you have to stay committed to it. And it is hard to really build that team. But I think that's when you do build it, that's when you really just start seeing the magic happen.
Yeah. And there's probably a lot of, kind of, I'll say just a raw network perspective, right? Every person that you bring in, no matter what the background is, but they bring kind of a cohort of friends and relationships. So the more you can also bring in diverse candidates, and then they've got their friends and then their friends, that kind of helps to create a lot of different pipelines for recruiting, I guess, too, right?
Absolutely. And on the other side of that coin, when you don't do it, you're all fishing from the exact same background and pedigrees, and we all know where that leads to.
There you go. And so moving on then, related but different, but women in sales. What are some of your thoughts there?
We need more of them. We all know the numbers say that women tend to achieve quota more consistently. And I think that's something we should just be all thoughtful of, is how can we foster more women in sales? I know something that's near and dear to your heart as well is you got to start at the bottom or the top, however you want to say it, early in their career. Let's go that way. So in previous lives, what I'd always focused on was building a really strong women pipeline, so to speak, in my SDR orgs. And then making sure they had good mentorship and conversations with other women in sales, so they could see themselves in those roles, those quota carrying roles outside of SDR.
Yeah. And then what about going back? Something we talked about before, but I'm always amazed. I mean, there's really not that different topics, but that there's not that many colleges that actually have, sales programs, but at least for those that do, the time to start, I mean, you have kind of however many people you have in the, how many women you have in sales are what they are there. But then you kind of, how do you go back to these colleges? Ones that have sales programs are great, but then even ones that don't, and say, okay, this is a viable field. I mean, how many people are, liberal, we're liberal arts, and then all of a sudden they end up in sales, and they thought there's no way in hell I'm going to do that. So kind of, I would think going back proactively somehow and really kind of educating, and not that you're grabbing, but just kind of showing the light.
Absolutely.
Some of those early on.
I mean, I definitely was in school at a point where we did not have a sales degree or anything of that nature. But I was in a comm school, a communication school. And I think a lot of the basics that were taught there are 100% still applicable to what selling is today. And so just taking that lens, broadening that lens a little bit to say, okay, well, where could we be recruiting from? Where should we be having conversations? Because I think that's, if you were looking for just sales degrees, that'd be very finite.
Yeah. Does UT have a sales program?
I don't know if they do now. But I was in the corporate communication school, and it seemed pretty similar.
Yeah, well, that's great. And then what's, any kind of special mentoring that you've gotten along the way that you can think of?
Yes, absolutely. So I think I got really lucky early on in my career. Do you know Matt Cameron? He's pretty prominent in the
I know the name, but
okay. He was my my manager back at Yammer. So this is 15, 16, 17 years ago. Is it that long ago? Regardless, he stayed near and dear to me, and has since then created his own community around different trainings you can take throughout your sales career. And so I've been lucky enough to have him as part of my mentorship throughout the years. And it evolves, right? It's not a consistent type of mentorship or relationship, but it's always nice to have someone that you can call and run a tough scenario or a tough problem through. And so if folks don't have someone like that, it's always something I encourage you to reach into your network and try to have those sounding boards, because it's been so critical to different points in my career.
Yeah. And I always have to watch what I say. So not to stereotype, but I also think sales is a great career, for those that are going to be, raising children, because these days, especially, you don't necessarily need to be in the office. You can have, better life balance. So if you think about, different careers that are out there, you think it's, in terms of, work-life balance, sales really offers, probably one of the better opportunities for that.
Sure. It definitely affords you to have more command over your calendar on a day-to-day basis. And that's been really wonderful. I have a 14-month-old at home, and like we shared earlier, and it's been great to be able to run him to and from daycare, things of that nature. And so as long as you are able to keep that command of your calendar,
Yeah.
it's a wonderful way to have that balance too.
Yeah. And I guess also too, I guess whether you're mother or father or whatever, however you identify that, with the whole Zoom technology, it's probably just broader topic on just parenting overall has probably helped, a lot of us, be home more. And a lot of times, say, instead of doing that, flight or be gone Monday to Friday, it's so good to be out there for sure, but you can be probably a lot more effective and a lot more selective. So being more productive in the workplace, and then, being, for lack of better words, just a better partner, a better spouse.
Absolutely. The ability to be more present, literally,
Yeah.
has been wonderful. But then on the flip side, you do sometimes get cameos from, little people you don't always want in your videos.
Yeah, but that's
So
just so authentic. I think, like, if walk by right now, I think that's so cute, right? Or you got dogs or whatever. I mean, it just shows that you're, especially, I think the higher up you go from an executive perspective, I mean, it just shows that people are people,
yeah,
right? It's like,
exactly.
I love
Exactly.
that. Yeah.
He's definitely made a cameo or two on videos before where I'm like, oh, at least have a shirt on. And he wouldn't be running around with a shirt on.
That's all right. That's great.
So,
Anyway, so maybe he'll come. Is he home now?
he is. He is.
Oh, okay. All right. We'll have to maybe get his first podcast appearance.
Oh, he would love that.
That's great. Anyway, so moving on here. So, value selling is something that is a topic, on the one hand, has been around for a while, but the other hand, there's probably mixed degrees in terms of how well people do that. How do you think of value selling?
I think it's become mission critical, especially in this economy. I mean, wouldn't you agree?
I'm violent agreement. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's something that when we face these macroeconomic headwinds, you really have to go back to some of these basics, right? And I think that value selling is almost should be considered part of like your basic sales process. And in good times, you can get away from it a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And I think now where we are, you really need to be very thoughtful with how you're building your business cases and how you're, engaging with your executives. And you just have to stay 100% tied to value.
Yeah. So, say, for example, if you're in a elevator with the CFO, either at a customer or something that you're trying to sell to, and you have kind of 20, 30 seconds, kind of what are some of your sound bites you'd use with your gong hat on?
Absolutely. Well, first I'd probably push the emergency button to grab more than 30 seconds.
There you go. Nobody's ever said that. I like that.
Oh, I appreciate that. I mean, so I'm sure one thing, Randy, you talk to people day in, day out about this, is that the level of scrutiny and review we've seen over our deals has become exponential over the last 6 to 9 months. $1 million deal feels like a $30 million deal now. And so if you were afforded that time with a CFO in an elevator or even on a quick call, you would just have to make sure you're really tied to the company's key strategic initiatives and how you're going to help move them forward and move them down the line. Because if you're not tied to those two things right now, you're going to have a very hard time getting that deal through. And so I wouldn't want to paint in broad brushstrokes there, but that's what I would just recommend everyone do is it has to be something they are keenly focused on and that your solution or platform can definitively solve.
Yeah, definitely. And I might say a few times I might be old school, but I think it comes down to ultimately, and even of what you just said is right there in terms of how does that impact revenue, how does that impact their OpEx line, right? So if you can impact those two things, and then therefore profitability, you're all in the CFO. And then how many times do you see technology companies have all this? I call them PowerPoints, but these slides of all this gobbledygook, and you're like, okay, so what? Okay, so you can do the technical speed and feed better, this or that. What are you actually really going to do to drive the business? And companies like Gong that can do a great job of articulating that are going to do well. Those that can't, forget about it.
Absolutely, exactly. And the forget about it is scary for a lot of people selling those forget about it platforms.
Totally. And then you also touch on another thing, which is I won't say complacency, but a lot of people the past year, were thought they were sales superstars because, for lack of better words, kind of the fish were jumping in the boats, and then now they have to maybe work a little bit harder. And I hear a lot is you may as well from your peers or friends, other companies, but they say hey, the economy, things are delayed. And then you start talking about the deal where, kind of where you at, who you talking to, what's your follow-up, like I've been on calls with people, they don't even set the next follow-up call. I'm like, okay, if you're going to wait, that just delays it 2 weeks. There's just so many basic things that really don't get done, that when things are maybe tighter economically, I mean, you just have to be on top of everything, which is not to play into the gong hand, but that's kind of talking
That's
about
what we do.
inspecting real time, right?
Absolutely. I mean, exactly that laundry list of what you're going through is how I use a Gong deal board to inspect my business and to make sure, do we have all those basics covered? And until I can say yes, 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 which Gong can, of course, report back to me in a matter of a couple of seconds of review, then we can go start talking about the next strategy session, or then how we're going to go execute to move this deal forward. But to your point, Randy, I was talking to a peer recently, and she was just complaining about how even with her enterprise sellers, not a Gong, but she's at a different company in the space, they were having to go back to the basics around confirming, did you do next steps? Are you at power? And it's just something I think that people got a little lackadaisical with. But luckily, we can inspect it with Gong.
Yeah. And also, Mike can talk forever. Last point I'll make, but even like a recap thank you note, I get brought into a deal to help. Okay, send me your last recap thank you note. Like, well, what do you mean? Like,
oh no, yeah.
What are you like? Are you kidding me? Like,
Or maybe I'm old school now too, Randy, because I would also just say it's like, thank people for their time and give them, and send that quick summary of what you spoke about.
Yeah, where are you at? What's going on? The next steps, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, okay, so like, anyway, so it's just crazy, all these things. Anyway, let's jump. So we have a couple things, Tucker, here. So from Laura, value selling, problem solving, and timing. I'd give that a thumbs up. So thank you, Laura. And from Peter Brennan, thanks, Peter. Sorry, I'm jumping back a subject. Totally always fine to jump back. Outside of their education path, are there examples of an early career and or D&I candidate's experience which stand out to you? And then specifically, can you think of certain types of jobs they have held in college, responsibilities they had, clubs they were part of, etc., where they built a foundation to be successful?
I love that. So I would actually, Peter, I'd focus more on competencies and behavioral traits versus past experiences. And here's why. I think if you focus just on past experiences, you could really go down this path of going down a profile that you typically hire for very, very quickly. Did they come from these top 10 schools in California? Did they do this in college or high school? And so if you're thinking about more about competencies, like I want someone who can really think creative and strategically, or who has experience like building something from the ground up, that could be a very interesting profile for someone in a group that's underrepresented, that could then be outside of that regular profile that you're talking about in terms of college and responsibilities. I hope that was.
Yes. So before you go on, so examples of building something from the ground up. I mean, practically speaking, somebody younger in their career probably wouldn't have done much to build something ground up, right?
So a woman I hired once into a role in a previous life was selling wholesale coffee prior to coming into tech. And that sounds like that's apples and oranges. Couldn't get further apart.
Right. Love it.
When you're interviewing with her, he was like, oh no, I owned all of Northern California. I had to cold call into them into small coffee places. And then I had to go, heels on the ground, go in and like teach them how to use our product and our services. So to me, what I was hearing was she's very entrepreneurial. She's not afraid of the phone. And then she also has the wherewithal to educate someone through the customer life cycle, her customer life cycle, but at least educate through. And so we hired her and she was a wonderful success. But if you were to ever look at her resume, wholesale coffee and tech don't go hand in hand at all, but it worked.
Yeah, I think that's great. I did T-shirts and hats in college and ski trips, so I guess it worked out okay. And then and you also mentioned attribute in terms of creative. So how would you identify somebody on the creative side?
And that's when you just go to those good old-fashioned open-ended questions and around like, walk me through a time when something in your life happened. And when you're thinking about these questions to ask, you're saying, these these are the 3 questions I'm going to ask to determine if they check the box for strategic thinking, creativity, being curious. What I'd also encourage is to keep those questions consistent across your interview, because then you're going to be able to create more of a baseline to say, okay, what does a good answer sound like, even though they'll come from very different points of view.
Yeah. And I guess, again, depending upon the background, we think about, jobs, even somebody that, was a waiter, waitress, where, a lot of times they get, paid a bonus if they sell whatever is the special item of the day. Those types of people that, also shows, a lot of hustle and a lot of initiative, and again, I'm old school, so not that there's anything wrong with academics, but I was early on at EMC, and no offense to Ivy League education, but it's like if we interviewed somebody who was from the Ivy League, it would be kind of almost more like a negative, right? As opposed to somebody that was more kind of blue collar, scrappy. Again, bad to do a broad stereotype, but kind of just peeling back the onion on really is what is that persona? What is that profile?
Absolutely.
Might be getting myself in trouble here a lot in this one, but anyway.
No, and I've definitely worked at companies early on in my career who had very high standards where you must be from Ivy or public Ivy, you must have this, you must have that, and I just don't think those standards fly anymore. I think you can do a whole lot better. I've worked with folks who actually don't have college degrees, and
I was just going to say next. Yeah. So what's your opinion on the importance of college degrees in hiring? And I have no idea what the Gong policy is one way or another.
I don't know what the Gong policy is one way or another as well. So I will share my policy, which is if it's not necessary for the role and they have the background and experience that you think can make them wildly successful in the role you're hiring for, I don't think I'd hesitate.
Yeah.
I don't think I would.
Yeah, I agree. I wonder if that's also just back to the whole, diversity side of things. If, kind of just, trade schools and, I wonder if there's, it would be a reach, but kind of, something of high school programs. I'm going to a program in New York City tonight. It's called NPower. So it's a kind of pet charity. A lot of Wall Street CIOs, chief information officers. Therefore, there's going to be a lot of people that are tech companies and sales leaders that are there. What they do, they go to those kind of high school ranks, not necessarily promoting college, but saying, okay, how can we give you the right technical skills, cyber and otherwise, so that way you can get, for lack of better words, real jobs. And I'm wondering, on the technical side of things, I think people have, not that they have forgotten about the college. To me, that's less important. I wonder on the sales side if that's something that could evolve too over time, which would be interesting. So anyway, we have a whole bunch of ways we can go reinvent the world in our next life.
I'm right there with you.
All right. So Lauren, Peter, thank you so much. For others that are watching along, feel free to comment or ask questions as well. Let's see, I'm losing track where I am here. Oh, what about so sales leaders maybe that you respect and why?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say that without calling out specific names, the people you typically respect are those sales leaders who
you can call it if you want. You can call it names. It's totally fine.
Okay.
Specific names, stories are all good. So I just leave it up to your judgment. But
yeah. Well, it's the people that bring their authentic selves to work every day. And I know, Randy, you were talking about that a little bit earlier as well. Whether it's letting them know when things are going on at home and hey, I'm having a little bit of a tough day. But when they're really leading from the front and showing who they are, those are the people I typically gravitate towards. So that's how I would in brief answer it for you.
All right. Awesome. And then different from that, what about how have you seen sales ops and kind of rev ops evolve over the years and the importance?
Absolutely. I think I'm really lucky because the sales ops and rev ops teams at Gong are just absolutely world class. And I don't think I knew what I was missing working with such world class folks until I joined Gong. And so just a huge shout out to them for making our lives day in, day out easier. And so I think that if I were to join another company or whatever it might be, like the importance of rev ops and sales ops and having a great strategic counterpart to help balance you out is just so mission critical nowadays. And it's been great to see even how our team has evolved over the last couple of years that I've been at Gong, where it's just a strategic powerhouse that just helps us see around corners and helps me and my teams execute more effectively. So it's been great to see that evolution.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned a little bit before, but it's kind of like the old days sales ops. You have get all this historical data, but just now it's amazing everything that's available to say kind of where are we headed? What's going on, and all that, the data and the feedback and the advice and the coaching is just I just find fascinating. Just
Absolutely.
so cool.
And just the ability to help in real time, and it's something, of course, Gong helps us with as well, is measuring, what we're doing, is it effective? If we roll out new messaging or a new product line, working with those teams to say, hey, are we using this messaging? Is it effective? If not, what can we start tweaking? That of course coupled with our enablement teams. And that's something where in previous lives, we were just waiting for did the revenue come in or not to help answer
Right.
those questions.
Yeah.
And so this new world is very much welcomed.
Any favorite mentors that you've had over the years, and any specific advice you've received?
Well, I mentioned Matt Cameron a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
So he's definitely one. And I think what he instilled in me so early on was just the love of creating process and making sure you follow your process too. And I think that was always just a big piece. The other big piece of best advice that I still chuckle with is my very first manager at O-Power. I remember feeling like a little overwhelmed one day, and he looked at me and he was like, "Kid, you can always right your ship in 24 hours." And I was like, "Okay." And he was like, "No matter what the problem is, if you really, take away distractions and focus on something, you're probably gonna be able to write it or at least have a path forward within 24 hours." And so I think that's always something that I've really kept close to my heart, because especially with how crazy the last few years have been with the pandemic, going remote, going back to hybrid, things change quickly. And it's always, I love that reminder that you can always right your ship in 24 hours. Nothing's too big.
Yeah, totally not get too stressed out, especially these days. I was with a friend yesterday who's a sales leader at a company doing well, looking at another job, and it's so stressful and getting all worked up. I'm like, it's a great alternative. Like, you're good either way. Given so many other people that are just looking for jobs or have issues, like that is awesome problem. So like, stop whining about it and just enjoy it. So anyway,
Absolutely.
lack of better words. What about any advice you would give your younger self?
It's almost what you just said. And it's also, funny enough, one of Gong's operating principles, which is enjoy the ride. And that, it's, there's going to be crazy times and there's going to be wonderful times and hard times. And just take a step back and make sure that you spend the moments there to appreciate whatever lessons you're learning. So I think that's always a good reminder, especially when you have a 14-month-old banging on the wall behind you right now.
That's
I don't know
awesome.
if you can. I don't know.
No,
if
I
you can.
can't hear it all.
Okay.
Yeah, I got people in the kitchen over here making noise. I don't know if you can hear that or not, but
I can't. So I think we're in a good spot.
well, it's good. At least we can both check in real time and make sure. And now, so even though you're in Nevada, then you've still been traveling on the road, I assume, correct?
We have, and it's just been so awesome to get back into the field and see our customers, break bread, have conversations in person, and even start, Gong is doing an incredible job on the marketing side of the house, spinning up events again. And so that has just been really awesome to see. So.
Yeah. I mean, in a lot of what you're doing is obviously it's consultative. So the relationship aspect side of that, especially taking over, current customers, it seems like generally speaking, not just Gong, but kind of the sales tech stack companies kind of grew up selling to marketing, ops, enablement, and now the kind of CRO has evolved as kind of the decision maker role. So has that been, I guess, a challenge or an opportunity kind of for your sales team to say, okay, let's kind of improve our relationship with this kind of new, I guess, could be same person that's been at the company you've not spoke to, or the tenure these days of 17 months of CROs, they keep changing. So making sure that you're building that relationship. Are you doing things there?
Absolutely. I think that it's an opportunity for us to go out and create those relationships, especially with our executives that we need to be with at this point. You also said something interesting about like the 17-month tenure. And that's something that we've seen starting to happen in the market is movement amongst executives. And so, right, we need to be building these relationships with the CRO, but we need to be multi-threaded at the executive level as well.
Right.
And so that's been a keen focus for us, getting out into the field, multi-threading at the executive level, and just building those relationships. Because at the end of the day, as much we can do over Zoom, I still maybe, again, now I'm stealing your line. I'm old school.
That's all right. It's all good.
There's just so much magic that happens in person.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially, I guess, on the rep side too, where you always have turnover in accounts, making sure that they're in there doing it. And, it's, for lack of better words, not that people get complacent, but, given a choice between, if I'm a rep, okay, I can, hang out at home and I can do my Zoom thing and that's acceptable, versus saying, okay, hey, I'm really going to get out there. I mean, that's also, it's a tough push. In today's world, you got to be careful, kind of how do you mandate, and you can't push too much, but that's the way we all grew up. How do you handle with some of that behavioral things, which, 10 years ago, you just say, okay, we're even going to metric you on all this stuff.
Right. And you're right. It is tough, especially because some folks may have taken a job when travel wasn't mandated or wasn't even allowed. And
Right.
Now that we're shifting expectations, you just have to be thoughtful with that and very slowly move into that. I don't have a perfect answer for how to move from the mandate of not traveling to going back to an old way of mandating of traveling. We're just, like I mentioned, we're just slowly getting into it. And most of my team seems excited about it, but we haven't gone back to metricing or doing anything like that in terms of getting into the field. Have you seen that?
But it might be a good idea.
Well,
it's hard, right? You can't push like the way, at least, in my generation would do, and you probably seen as well, but just, there's a lot of that you've got to be, kind of a lot more sensitive about. And you've got, I think, leaders, especially sales leaders, struggle with that. And you hope that you've got obviously the right culture, the right behaviors, and you hired right, and people want to do because the right things, and you can provide the right, balance and family and everything else. But at the end of the day, I mean, there's just basic stuff that you got to do to get out there. So
absolutely,
it's interesting. So maybe somewhat related. So you've had a catbird seat in sales. You're at arguably one of the best sales tech sales tech stack, I guess, companies. So if you fast forward in the future, kind of 5-10 years, what do you think is going to change?
Ooh, that's a great question. That's actually hard to answer at Gong, and because I've never been at a company that releases product and innovates as quickly as Gong does. And so we have a lot of amazing things that we're starting to push through, whether it's like the Gong Collective or Gong Assist. But I don't know what are my counterparts that are just absolute geniuses on the product side are whipping up for the next 5 years.
Yes, I'm not talking. Sorry. Yes, I'm not. I don't want to have you disclose the Gong roadmap, but I just mean in general, right? So if you just take tech sales anywhere to say, what do you think? So like, obviously we wouldn't have 5 years ago, if you ever said, Randy, you're going to be doing Zooms, you're going to be doing a podcast. Yeah. You're going to know how to do, calendar invites. You're going to have Calendlies. I would say there's no way. Right. So, and those are maybe more tactical things, but
yeah. I mean, I think we're going to see more automation come through. And I think that it's going to be a balance of more automation. But I do think the personal relationship piece is something that's also not going to go away. So hybrid work, hybrid selling, kind of what we're seeing like being evolved today is something that I think will continue to be pushed into in the next 5 years. But Randy, I think if you had said I'm going to be doing a podcast 5 years ago, I could believe that, right? That's
You can now. I don't know then. People knew me then. I don't know. So interesting to see. So, all right. Well, time flies when you are having fun. You've been a fantastic guest, so really appreciate it. For those that are watching, feel free to share. Tucker behind the scenes gets it posted on all the different social medias and sliced and diced everywhere. So certainly a great PR piece, I think, for Gong and your customers and partners and anybody looking at what you do. And we left out the Alexander Group, so we still got a couple minutes. So, okay, Alexander Group. So you'd mentioned you have some familiarity. And any story there? Sorry, I totally forgot.
Yeah, absolutely. They I think it was actually the Alexander Group does a women's forum. Is that correct?
Yep.
And so it was Kelly Wright has spoken on it before, our president and COO. And so they're just a great Gong partner as well. And I know they're doing a lot of great information in the public. So awesome. I can't give as much of a 30-second clip as you did at the beginning, but I definitely have some awareness.
There you go. Yeah, and actually they've got a great exec event coming up in Dana Point. It's right before the BC Notre Dame.
That's right. Ryan Longfield, my CRO, I believe, will be attending.
Yes, yeah, so it's middle November. I'll be there. So anybody looking at that should definitely consider it. So now I'll go. We have our next guest was going to be Carl Ashenbach, but he had a unfortunate family situation come up. Carl, I think you've worked with. I would imagine. He's from what I hear, I know he's pretty hands-on, so I'm sure you worked with him some. Longtime VMware exec and at Sequoia. So we're working on rescheduling him. And if not, the following week we have Dan Campbell, who's not long time, but I guess above average for early EMC exec and then CRO at NCR. And we'll be landing another great CRO gig shortly. So anyway, so Annelies, thanks. Tucker behind the scenes, thanks. Anybody feel free to check out Alexander Group and also Sales Community. So with that, have a great rest of day and great rest of week.
Thank you, Randy.